Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is What If Naruto Daimyo Heritage is Revealed Council Bashing Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. It was a typical average day in Konoha. The sky was clear and the sun was shining and everyone in the village was busy and happy. Especially one particular person in the village. This person was Uzumaki Naruto. The reason as to Naruto being so happy was because it was just yesterday that he had defeated his traitorous former sensei Mizuki, who had tricked him into stealing the forbidden scroll for him, and had become an official genin of Konoha and was now one step closer at achieving his dream of becoming Hokage. Unfortunately not everyone in the village was happy that Kyuubi brat had finally become a genin. Some had even gone to the Hokage to try and convince the Hokage to remove him from the shinobi ranks, but the Hokage wouldn't budge and refused to remove Naruto as a shinobi of Konoha since he had earned it. I can't believe that the Hokage is willing to let that monster become a shinobi and be trained to get stronger, said one civilian who had been watching Naruto heading to Ichiraku ramen bar. I know, the Hokage has always been too soft especially when it came to that demon, said another. We should have had him killed the moment that the Yondaime had sealed the fox into him and ended its existence once and for all, since the fact that it's even alive now is an insult to everyone that day including the Yondaime, said a third civilian. Then let's do it since I know a lot of guys would love to kill that wretched thing, for good, said the first civilian. Yeah, I even get my brother and a few friends of his, since he always told me he love a chance to gut that demon and send him the hell where he belongs, said the third civilian. Fine, then we met back in 2 hours, after which we hunt that hell spawn down and send him off to hell, said the second, after which the three men left. 2 hours later at the Konoha main gate. At the Konoha main gate 3 hooded figures could be seen walking into the village. One of the figures was fairly tall and was about 6'2" and wore a long black hooded coat with the hood covering his head and his lower mouth could only be seen. He also wore black fingerless gloves, and black shinobi pants and wore black boot and short sleeve shirt. He also carried a long katana with a flame-shaped like hilt, and a red sheath holding the sword on his left-hand side. The second person was about 5'3" and wore a long white hooded coat with green edges and the hood covering his head and his lower mouth could only be seen. He also wore black shinobi pants and brown boots and a green open robe top with brown armbands. He also had a green sash around his shoulders, held together by a round clip. The sash held his long sword sheath in place on his back and is tied to it at either end. His sword was about 1.4 meters long with the exception of the guard, which is in the shape of a 4-pointed bronze-colored star. The third person was about 5'1" and wore a long gray hooded coat cover her head and her lower mouth could only be seen. Underneath the coat she wore a silver short-kneed sleeveless kunoichi outfit. With a purple corset and red ribbon around it. She also wore white tabi and a pair of waraji, as well as a tight layer of fishnet that stretches from her neck down to her lower thighs underneath her outfit and wore fishnet armbands that went right up to her upper arms. She also had a long sword on her back. The handle hilt and the sheath were both pure white and the hilt was in a round circle shape. It's been a long time since I've been here, the village hasn't really changes all that much, thought the person in black as memories of his past in the village started to come back, some good and a lot bad. Sensei, are you okay? Asked the girl wearing the gray coat since her sensei had stopped at the entrance and was just look out at the village. I'm fine, Saya, just feeling a bit of nostalgia, replied the hooded man. I never took you as a nostalgic person, sensei, since you always said that you don't like remembering the past much, replied the boy in the white coat. I may not like remembering the past much, Ketsu, but I do get nostalgic now again when I'm in familiar places like everyone else. Besides, only a fool tries to ignore his past since those who do not learn from the past are doomed to repeat it, replied the person in black. The man then went to the entrance booth and met two Chunins. Are you visiting or returning? Asked the Chunin. Returning. replied the man in black. And the children with you? Asked the other Chunin. They are with me, they are my students, and they have citizenship for Fire Country, said the man in black as he gave his students' papers to the Chunin to prove they were citizens of Fire Country. And you are a shinobi here, correct? Asked the first Chunin, which the man nodded. May we have your shinobi ID card to prove your identity? Asked the first Chunin again, where the man simple-handed it them once they gave back his students' citizenship papers. When the two Chunin looked at the man in black picture ID card and the name and saw his face when he lifted his hood a little to reveal his face, they went ghost white and quickly gave back ID card. Forgive sir. WWE. Had NN no idea that, why you were returning to Konoha, and WEDDD did, not RR recognize you at first, since it been 12 years since you been last here, said the first Chunin nervously. That is not a problem, replied the man in black calmly without any emotion. We shall inform the Hokage that you have arrived at once, spoke the second Chunin. That will not needed, since I will go to him myself, replied the man calmly, at which both Chunin nodded. The man then turned to his students. You two go ahead and get some supplies and what else we need, and I met you at the Hokage Tower in an hour, spoke the man with the same neutral-like tone he had spoke to with the Chunins. The two students both nodded and then shunshined away, while the man then continued to walk down the street slowly, taking in the sights. 40 minutes later. Currently Naruto was now running for his life, right, since he was being chased by a large mob of 50 civilian men, 4 Chunins and a Jonin. He had just finished celebrating his ninja status at Ichiraku Ramen Bar, where Tyuki and his daughter Ayame had treated him to a free meal. As he left, the mob and ninjas saw him and went after him. Naruto had tried to hide, but the Jonin that lead the mob was a former Oinin and was able to find them. Also Naruto knew that if he tried to fight, either the Jonin or Chunins would beat him up and kill him along with the mob, or the council will try and have him executed on bogus charges and for simply defending himself. It was as he was running down the street he took a quick turn right into an alley hoping to escape from the mob, but unfortunately when he did he found it to be a dead end. Before he could even try and turn back, he found the entrance into the alley being blocked by the mob. Nowhere to run now, demon, sneered the Jonin. It's time to finally finish what the Yondaime started and end you once and for all and avenge everyone you killed, said one of the Chunins. Please don't, I didn't do any of that, I'm not the Kyuubi, pleaded Naruto frighteningly as he had back to the corner of the alley. Save you pleads for someone else, monster, it's time to die, shouted a civilian man, after which the mob charged forward and start to beat, kick, stab and hit Naruto. This continued for several minutes until a voice suddenly shouted, Futon. Kami Oroshi, wind style. Godly wind from the mountain, in which a vortex of wind hit the mob and blew them away from Naruto and out of the alley. Quickly enough the mob gathered themselves together, saw a tall man wearing black hooded coat with the hood covering his head where the mob could only see his lower mouth. He also wore black fingerless gloves, and black shinobi pants and wore black boot and short-sleeve shirt. He also carried a long katana with a flame-shaped like hilt and a red sheath holding the sword on his left-hand side. Who the hell are you? Shouted one of the Chunin. Who am I is of no concern to you, but I do want to know as to why over 50 grown men are attacking an innocent young boy, responded the black-clad man without any emotion. That is no boy, that's a demon in disguise. WHO killed hundred of our friends and loved ones, roared a civilian. After which for a few minutes the man said nothing and continued to look at the mob until he suddenly muttered a single word. Bakas. What did you just call us, you bastard? Cried a Chunin. I do not like to repeat myself, so I will not, especially to ignorant fools such as yourselves. Clearly you lack the mental capacity to be able to tell the difference between a young boy and a demon. I have fought several different demons and I know that no demon who ever allow itself to be attacked and beaten by weaklings like yourselves, replied the man. You bastard, cried another Chunin as he charged forward with his kunai. As he did, the man stood still and did not even move an inch. Just as the Chunin was about to stab him with his kunai, the man quickly sidestepped the attack, and then grabbed the Chunin wrist. He then used his other hand to push in the Chunin elbow inward, and in one quick motion he snapped the Chunin arm in two. The Chunin screamed in pain, after which the man swung the Chunin around and slammed the Chunin into the wall on his right-hand side, knocking the Chunin out and causing a large dent in the wall with several spider cracks around it. "You'll pay for that," cried another Chunin as he and two others appeared in midair behind him and were about to stab him. But before they could, he disappeared and appeared in midair in front of them doing a spinning kick, in which he then hit the Chunin furthest to left, causing him to collide with the other two, where they all slammed into the wall and knocked out together. After which the man gracefully landed back on the ground. "As I said, bakas. Huh, so you have some skills, I see, and from what I can see you are quite skilled at taijutsu. Judging by the way you handle my friends there, you are at Jonin level, which is the same level as me," spoke the Jonin as he carefully observed the man in black. "It seems that Konoha ninjas have become quite arrogant since I was last here," spoke the man neutrally, which caused the Jonin to frown. "And how am I arrogant, since all I stated was that we were at the same level, and that can't be called arrogant," replied the Jonin. "The fact that you consider yourself to be on the same level as myself is being arrogant itself," replied the man neutrally again, which caused the Jonin to frown further. "Huh, if anyone here is arrogant it is you, and I think I have to humble you a bit, and teach you never to underestimate a Jonin of Konoha," spoke the Jonin as he took out his kunai. He then got into a stance and got ready to attack the man in black, who was remaining perfectly still as he was when the Chunins attacked. Just as when the Jonin was about to attack the man in black, the man disappeared within a blink of an eye. Before the Jonin could even fully realize that the man was gone, he suddenly felt an enormous pain coming from his stomach. When he looked down, he saw the man kneeling down and elbowing him in the stomach. Impossible. How could he move that fast? Thought the Jonin before he keeled over and passed out from the sheer pain of the man's hit. "As I said, arrogant," muttered the man. When the 50 civilian members of the mob saw the Jonins being defeated so easily and effortlessly by the black-hooded stranger, they started to get scared. Many were already starting to think about running away, until one of the members suddenly spoke up. "Come on, he just one man, he can't beat us all," cried a member of the man as he charged forward with his knife, after which the rest of the mob charged forward as well. As the lead civilian charged forward with his knife and was about to stab the black-clad man in the stomach, the black-clad man caught the civilian wrist just before the knife could penetrate him, after which the man then twisted the civilian man arm with such force he broke the civilian man arm. The black-clad man then lifted the civilian man arm upward, which then caused the civilian man arm to snap, causing the man to scream out in pain and collapse on the ground. After which the black-clad stranger went and engaged the rest of the mob. Go to YouTube and type in Tony Jaw Breaking Bones Revenge of the Warrior, Tom Yum Gung, or type in Warrior King Bone Breaking to see what fight scene was like. After the fight had ended, every single member of the mob was on the ground groaning and howling in pain. Since every single one of them had broken a bone, whether it was an arm or a leg or even both. The black-clad man had beaten them all effortlessly within just 2 minutes. "Cursed filth," spat the black-clad man as he looked down at the groaning men as they held their broken limbs with a disgusted look on his face. Since he despised people like them who attacked and beat innocent children who are unable to defend themselves. When he fought the men, he had held back enormously, since he could have killed all of them within seconds, but decided not to, and to just teach them a severe lesson about attacking children. This had been an enormous amount of self-control from the man, since when he was walking in the middle of the street, and saw the mob chasing the boy in the corner him in the alley and attack him. The black man had been sorely tempted to butcher all of them, but believed to do so would be more trouble than it was worth. The black-clad man then quickly disappeared and reappeared next to Naruto and turned him over to see how badly hurt he was. When he turned Naruto around, who was unconscious due to the beating and was in a huddled position, and saw his face, a shocked look came across the man's face. Naruto. But how I thought he was dead. Sarutobi even showed me his body, so why did he lie to me? Though the man in confusion until he looked at Naruto whisker birthmarks. After which he then opened up Naruto orange jacket, and lifted up his shirt and channeled some chakra onto Naruto's stomach. When he did, Naruto's seal appeared over his stomach and confirmed the black-clad man's worst fears. He then turned and looked up at the Hokage monument and glared coldly in the Yondaime face. Damn you to hell, it wasn't enough for you to ruin my life, but to ruin his life as well by turning him into a Jinchuriki. Damn you, damn both you and Sarutobi to hell, thought the man in black angrily. And as if answering to the black-clad man's angry thought, Sarutobi Hiruzen aka the Sandaime Hokage, aka the Professor, aka Shinobi no Kami, god of shinobis, appeared. Along with 30 Anbu Black Ops operatives, where 20 of them stood behind him and the remaining 10 stood around the rooftops surrounding the black-clad man and Naruto. Both Sarutobi and the Anbu Black Ops members had been watching the entire fight from a distance. They saw how easily the black-clad stranger had handled the Jonin and the Chunin's members of the mob as well as the civilian members of the mob. The Anbu had grown concerned when they saw him defeat the 4 Chunins and the Jonin like they were noting but fresh genin. Sarutobi had also grown especially concerned when he saw how the stranger had handled the civilian members of the mob in such a brutal and vicious way, especially since the fighting style the man used seemed very familiar to him. When the man had dealt with the mob and went to Naruto, Sarutobi decided to confront the man. Step away from Naruto and identify yourself, spoke Sarutobi with an air of authority that only a leader of men would have. When Sarutobi spoke, the man said nothing and remained still for several moments before he then picked Naruto up and stood up carrying Naruto in his left arm. After which the man slowing turned around to face Sarutobi and the Anbu, although the man still had his hood up so they could only see his mouth and the bottom part of his face. I told you to step away from Naruto, now place him on the ground immediately and identify yourself or we will be forced to attack you, spoke Sarutobi angrily. Since he was angered at how the stranger blatantly ignored his order and picked Naruto up and refused to speak. For a few more minutes the man just stood there looking at Sarutobi and the Anbu. Soon enough Sarutobi had enough and was about to speak again when the stranger suddenly spoke up in a calm but chilling cold voice. You lied to me, Sarutobi. What? Asked the confused Hokage, since he did not understand what the stranger was talking about or how he knew his name. The stranger just ignored his question and continued to speak in the same chillingly cold voice. You told me he was dead and yet here he is in this village alive and being attacked by your shinobis and your villagers. What are you talking about? Who are you? Asked annoyed and angry Sarutobi. Have you forgotten me already, Sarutobi, or have you simply become senile in your old age? Replied the stranger, which caused the Anbu to stiffen and get into a fighting stance, since the stranger had just insulted their leader. Who the devil are you? Answer me, spoke the Hokage forcefully since he was losing patience with the man. The man did not answer or move for several minutes until he finally lifted his right hand up and removed his hood so to reveal his face. The man was a young and attractive man who looked to be in his early 20s. He had long purple hair that reached down to his shoulder blades and it went down to his face, where he had it parted on the right side and with one long piece falling over his left eye. He had a narrowing face and had bright blue eyes too. When Sarutobi saw the man's face he went pale white where a look of complete shock came across his face. Since he now knew who this person was even though the person's voice had changed and he had grown more as well as looked older, he still recognized the young man. As Sarutobi looked at the young man in stunned disbelief he could not help but mutter a single word. Quote, Jeanne. When the more senior members of the Anbu group saw the young man's face and heard Sarutobi they could but subconsciously take a step back in fear. When the rookie and younger Anbu members saw the shock and stun look across the face of their Hokage, as well as seeing the senior members of the Anbu group taking their step backs in fear of the person, They grew confused at who was this man that got the Hokage and the senior Anbu so worried. So you do remember me, replied Janae, after which he then started to walk slowly towards Sarutobi and the main Anbu group. When he got to them, Janae walked right past Sarutobi, who was still stunned at Janae appearing, and stopped when he was on Sarutobi's left-hand side. He then spoke to him without turning to the old Hokage and spoke in the same chillingly calm and cold voice he had been speaking them with. I suggest you have the village council fully summoned in the next 3 hours, because both you and they have much to explain about lying to me and for what you have done to Naruto, spoke Janae. When Sarutobi turned slightly to look at Janae, he saw Janae giving him a cold look at the corner of his eye. When Sarutobi locked eyes with Janae, he suddenly felt as if he had been stabbed by an invisible blade in the chest, and all the air in his lungs got caught in his throat as he looked into Janae's cold yet empty blue eyes. The sheer intensity of them nearly gave the old Kage a heart attack. The Sandaime couldn't help but feel disturbed and slightly irritated as he looked into Janae's eyes. After a few moments, Janae turned away from Sarutobi and was about to continue to walk forward until a young Anbu suddenly spoke up. Hey, don't you dare talk to the Hokage like that, said the young Anbu as he had stretched out one went to grab Janae's shoulder to stop him. No, don't, warned Sarutobi, but it was too late, since just before the Anbu hand could touch Janae's shoulder, Janae disappeared and reappeared within the blink of an eye, holding the young Anbu in the middle of the air by his throat with his one remaining free hand. As the young Anbu was being held in the air, he struggled to breathe, since he could barely breathe with the vice-like grip that Janae had on his throat, and was slowly being choked to death. Not to mention the intense cold glare that Janae was giving him had frozen the young Anbu in terror. If you know what good for you, boy, you will never try touch me like that again, said Janae coldly, which the young Anbu could only nod slightly. After which Janae dropped him and on his rear and walked forward towards the Anbu group that were in his way. I suggest that you all move out of my way if you all know what is good for you, said Janae coldly. Like Sarutobi, the Anbu group couldn't help but feel disturbed and irritated of the intensity of Janae's cold empty eyes. They could practically feel the imitating presence that Janae was well known to have. It was made even worse when he started to leak out a small amount of killing intent. Even though it was small, it was incredibly thick and potent, where it took all the willpower that the Anbu had to wither under the killing intent. Soon enough, the Anbu quickly made a path for Janae to walk through. A wise choice, replied Janae emotionlessly as he walked through the group and down the street a bit, and then shunshed away with the unconscious and beaten Naruto still in his left arm. Cough. Who the hell, cough, was that, cough, bastard, cough, asked the young Anbu, who was still holding his throat in pain. That bastard, as you called him, as Akechi Janae, or as we would know him best in the Anbu division as Chinyororyu, the bloody red dragon, spoke a Anbu captain. That was him? Asked the young Anbu as he went pale white with fear, since Chinyororyu was a name well known to all Anbu. Due to the number of enemies he butchered during the Third Great Shinobi World War. Yes, but there is one other name that he is better known as and is more famous as, said another Anbu captain. Which is? Asked the young Anbu, although dreading the answer. Konoha no Hitokiri Batosai, Konoha's sword-drawing manslayer, 3, spoke the Anbu. When the young Anbu heard this, he nearly shitted himself at realizing how close he came to being killed. Since Hitokiri Batosai was a name that was nearly as feared and revered as the Konoha's Yellow Flash in other countries, especially in Iowa. His power and fame was so great in Konoha that only the likes of Konoha no Shiroi Kiba, Konoha's White Fang, Hataki Sakumo, the Densetsu no Sanin, the legendary 3 ninja, Shinobi no Kami, god of shinobis, Sarutobi Hiruzen, and Konoha no Kiroi Senko, Konoha's Yellow Flash, Namikaze Minato, as well as a few select others, could surpass it in fame and reverence. The other younger Anbu were no better off than the one who had challenged Janae, since they had nearly attacked Janae, which they now knew would have resulted in their deaths or having every bone in their bodies broken in the very least. Hokage-sama, should we be worried that he may harm the boy considering that ease, spoke a female Anbu, but before she could finish she was interrupted by Sarutobi. No, Janae would never harm Naruto in a million years. But how can you be sure? Asked another Anbu. Because Janae would sooner cut off his own right arm than harm his own brother, or to be more precise his half-brother, spoke Sarutobi with a sigh, since he knew what was going to happen very soon. BB brother, said one of the Anbu who were all stunned. To which Sarutobi just nodded. T then would TT that mean T that? Asked the same Anbu, only to be interrupted by Sarutobi. Yes. Both Naruto and Janae are the sons of the Yondaime Hokage Namikaze Minato, replied Sarutobi with another sigh, as the Anbu were completely stunned, since they now knew exactly what was going to happen in next few hours. And may the heavens have mercy on us all, for Janae certainly will not once he learns the truth, though Sarutobi, as he felt older than he had ever felt in his entire life, as he slowly walked back to the Hokage Tower to prepare for the council meeting as well as the bloodbath that was sure to follow. After leaving the Hokage and the Anbu, Janae shunshined himself and Naruto to the hospital and quickly entered it carrying Naruto in his arms. Excuse me madam, but I need help, this boy has been attacked and needs medical attention immediately, spoke Janae to a nurse at lobby receptionist desk. Of course sir, let me have a look at him, spoke the nurse, but the moment that she saw that the boy that Janae was carrying was Naruto, her face suddenly turned to anger and disgust. What the hell is that hell spawn doing here? He doesn't deserve any treatment after all the people he's killed. Throw him out to the street and let him die in the gutter where he belongs. He should be ARG, shouted the nurse until she was suddenly grabbed by Janae by the throat and lifted up and held in the air by Janae's free hand. As the nurse was lifted in the air, she struggled to breath due to Janae's vice-like on her throat, and was petrified by pure terror as she looked into his cold murderous eyes, that told her that she was a hair's breadth away from having her neck snapped. Now I'm only going to ask this once, so I suggestion that you listen well fool, because if you do not answer it then there will be one more body in the morgue, do you understand me, spoke Janae with a cold and dangerous voice. To which the nurse just nodded, since she could not speak, with Janae's hand on her throat. Good, then, tell me where the nearest free room is so that I can treat this boy, since it is clear that the hospital's medical staff are made up entirely of imbeciles, said Janae, to which the nurse pointed to the hallway at Janae's right. G go, D do down the, H hallway. TT to room T22. Which W will be on your right H hand side, that room is free, croaked the nurse, after which Janae then let her go, where she then landed on her rear. Janae then started to walk down to the hallway until he suddenly stopped and spoke to the women without turning around to face her. If you do not wish to have any more injured people, I suggest that you keep people out of that room. Also a word of advice, I suggest from now on you think carefully before you speak in front of someone, since if you do not, you are liable to get yourself killed. Especially when you speak to me, spoke Janae, where he finished with a murderous tone and released a small burst of killing intent, and sent it directly at the nurse and knocked the foolish nurse out and caused her to start foaming from the mouth. When Janae entered the room, he locked the room and then laid Naruto on the bed and started to examine Naruto's body for what kind of injuries he had. As he examined Naruto, he found that he had 4 broken ribs as well as a fractured leg and a broken arm as well as several bruises and large cuts on his body. Also, as he examined them, Janae was shocked to see Naruto's body was littered in old scars. He had several diagonal scars going across his chest and back. His arms looked like they had been burned by something, and on his back were several large scars as if he had been tortured. When Janae had seen all this, words could not begin to say the sheer amount of rage and fury that he was feeling right now. Although on the outside Janae seemed to be calm and emotionless, but on the inside an raging storm of fury and anger was raging inside of him. Those monster, how dare they do this to him? He's only a boy. When I find the ones WHO have done this to him, I swear on the blood of my ancestors they will know suffering and pain like no other man or woman has ever known, I swear it. thought Jeanne in a fury. After a minute or so, Jeanne calmed himself down and continued to look over Naruto. As he did, he could not help but remember that first and last time he saw him. Flashback. Currently sitting alone on a bench near the double doors of the birthing room in a hidden location outside Konoha village, Namikaze Minato was sitting there waiting for Bawako, the Sandame's wife, to call him into birthing room so that he could maintain the seal of the Kyuubi and hold it back when Kushina was giving birth to his second son Naruto. As he waited, he saw someone walking towards him. The person he saw was his eldest son Jeanne. Although he was only 10, Jeanne was tall for his age and was about 5'5". He wore a black shirt and black shinobi's pants and wore iron guard fingerless gloves. He also wore a standard shinobi flak jacket, although instead of the standard green one that Konoha shinobis usually wore, Jeanne's one was black. He had long purple hair that reached down to his shoulder and it went down to his face, where he had it parted on the right side and with one long piece falling over his left eye. Jeanne also carried his black-bladed sword that had a flame-shaped hilt, which he handmade himself, on his left-hand side. Jeanne had only recently become a Jonin since he had only just retired from the Anbu division, which he joined when he was only 8, making him both the youngest person to become an Anbu operative and a Jonin in Konoha's history. When Jeanne reached Minato, he just walked past him without so much as a word to him and went to stand against the wall in front of Minato and folded his arms, lowered his head and closed his eyes as he waited with Minato. Minato just signed. In the past 2 years his and Jeanne relationship had not been good, which was putting it mildly, since Jeanne hated Minato with a passion, not that Minato blamed him for hating him since he hated himself for what he did. The reason for all this was because of what happened in a mission during the Third Great Shinobi World War. Minato and his old teammate Akechi Gracia, Jeanne Mother, 1. Their mission was to sneak behind Iwa lines when Konoha forces drew out Iwa main forces in a pitch battle, and then sneak into Iwa main supply base and destroy it. With the supply base destroy, Iwa would have no choice but to fall further back to Tsuchi no Kuni, Earth Country, and out of Kusa no Kuni, Grass Country. The mission was a success and they were able to destroy the supply base, but it had been more heavily guarded than was believed, during which Gracia had been badly wounded at the fight. Minato had been able to hide both her and himself in a small cave in a large forest from the pursuing Iwa shinobis and set up a few traps to both protect them and warn them if anyone was near the cave. Minato then treated Gracia to the best of his abilities so that she could at least survive long enough to get back to base when she could get proper medical treatment. For several hours they had waited to when the area was clear of enough Iwa shinobis to make a break back to Konoha lines, since they knew that if they tried to break through with the forest full of Iwa ninjas they would never make it out alive, especially with Gracia in her wounded condition. After a while he had gone out to scout around the area and see if the Iwa shinobis had gone by and if they could make a break back to Konoha's lines. But as he was scouting around he saw something he never thought he would see. He saw the Yondaime Tsuchikage traveling with just 2 Jonin guards and heading towards the battle between Konoha and Iwa forces. At the time he did not want to miss an opportunity like that, and so he perused after the Tsuchikage, since he knew at the time if he killed the Tsuchikage, Iwa would have no choice but to surrender, hence ending the war, and with such a light guard he believed he could do it, and so he pursued after them. For 20 minutes he chased after the Tsuchikage and his guards, but unfortunately at some point he had lost them, after which he then headed back to Gracia. But when he got back he found the bodies of 2 Iwa shinobis and Gracia dead body, which had been mutilated with signs of being raped beforehand. It was when he saw this he realized that when he went after the Tsuchikage and his guards some Iwa shinobis had attacked her, and although she clearly fought back, the remaining Iwa shinobi or shinobis had overwhelmed her and proceeded to rape and mutilate her and then kill her before leaving. After he got back to Konoha he explained what had happened to Jiraiya, Sarutobi and the Konoha elders. That was properly the worst day in Minato's life, since it was the first and only time that Jiraiya had ever looked disappointed and ashamed of Minato, since he had left his wounded teammate alone and unprotected. It got even worse when Janet burst the room since he had accidentally overheard what had happened when he was coming to report to the Sarutobi about his last mission. So when Janet heard what had happened to his mother, and how Minato was responsible for his mother's death, and wasn't going to be punished for abandoning his wounded teammate after a mission, which was a high crime in Konoha, so that he could to chase after the Tsuchikage, who was never even confirmed sighted at the battle by any other Konoha shinobis, it caused Janet to burst into the room and try and attack him only to be held back by Jiraiya. It got even worse when Janet learned that what had happened to his mother would never be released to the public too, since he, Minato, had been named as the Sandame's successor and become the next Hokage. When Janet heard this, he lost complete control of himself and broke out of Jiraiya's hold and attacked him, Minato. During which the fight between them speared into the street. During the fight, Janet also awakened his bloodline, the Basakamui, Berserker Fury 3, which had thought to have been lost, since his mother never awakened it and he had shown no signs of having it either. When Minato had finally beaten Janet, he had tried to reconcile with Janet, but when he tried to hug him, Janet slapped him away. After which Janet then renounced him as his father and said he wanted nothing to do with again, since as far as Janet was concerned he was the man who abandoned his mother to be raped and murdered. When Janet said that it had broken Minato's heart, Janet hadn't even let him come to Gracia's funeral and pay his last respects. Janet also cut all contact with Kushina as well, even though she was his godmother. The reason why was because a few months after Gracia's death she married Minato, which Janet found it to be a betrayal by Kushina to his mother for marrying the man who abandoned her best friend. It was after Gracia's death did Janet become distant from most people and became cold and uncaring to everyone except for a select few. During the war his fame rose to new heights. Janet became almost as infamous with Iwa and Konoha's other enemies as Minato was. Where by the end of the war, Janet was known not only as Chinyororyu, Bloody Red Dragon, from when he was in Anbu, but also earned the new nickname Konoha no Hitokiri Batuse, Konoha's sword-drawing manslayer, due to the sheer numbers of Iwa shinobis he killed as revenge for his mother Gracia. When the war ended and Minato was about to become Hokage, Janet immediately retired from the Anbu right before he would have become the youngest Anbu captain ever at age 10. Most did not know why he did it since the fight between Minato and Janet was kept quiet, although the few that knew about falling out between Minato and Janet knew that Janet did not want to serve directly under Minato. Before that, both Minato and Kushina had tried many times to try and make peace with Janet, but each time he just shunned them away. Janet had even become disgusted the people of Konoha at how they would praise Minato all the time, since he found it an insult to his mother memory as they praised the man responsible for her death. It was not until when Minato and Kushina sent word to Janet that she was pregnant with Naruto did things show signs of some improvement, since Janet was actually willing to speak to them even for a few minutes. Janet would even come by time from time to see how Kushina was doing and if she needed anything when Minato was away on missions. But even despite this improvement, the tension between them was still thick and Janet would only speak to Minato when he had to. For the next few minutes there was nothing but silence between the two of them. Soon enough, though, Bawako called Minato in as they were ready to begin the birthing. Janet was allowed to enter as well due to being family and having clearance as well. For the next hour or so Janet is standing next to Kushina, hold her hand as a sign of support as she gave birth to Naruto. As Kushina was screaming, Minato grew concerned and panicked a little over the pain his wife was suffering. At this, Bawako commented how he was the Yondaime Hokage and shouldn't panic, along with stating that this was why women have babies and men don't, as they can't handle pain. This comment of course brought a ghost of a smile to Janet's lips, but the smile quickly ended when Kushina started screaming again and nearly broke his hand by squeezing it too tightly. Soon enough, though, Bawako cried out that she could see the head and that Kushina was nearly there. At the same time, Minato was struggling to hold the kyubi in its seal. After one final push, the sound of a crying baby that had just been born was heard in the room, and Bawako was ordering the Anbu assistant Taji to get hot water. Soon after, Bawako was holding a crying baby Naruto with whisker birthmarks on his face, no doubt some kind of result of being the child of the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. Congratulations, it's a healthy baby boy, Sei said. At this sight, but Minato and Kushina cried tears of joy. Even Janae smiled at the sight of his new baby brother. This was something that made both Minato and Kushina smile, since this was the first time that either of them had seen Janae smile since before his mother's death. "Isn't he beautiful, Minato-kun?" asked Kushina, to which Minato only nodded and smiled down on his newly born son and then kissed Kushina on the head. After which Minato then had a serious look on his face. "Okay Kushina, I know you exhausted from the birth, but we've gotta get the Kyuubi completely sealed," where he then quickly went over to the seal on Kushina belly. "Hua, ha, right. But first, Janae, would you please hold Naruto for me?" said Kushina as she prepared herself for the sealing. "Of course," said Janae as he let go Kushina and went to Bawako and took Naruto from her. As Janae gently held on to Naruto as he started to settle down and stop crying, Janae could not help like the idea of being an older brother and looking out for Naruto. As he thought of this, Janae smiled down at his newborn brother. But a moment later, Janae Shinobi's senses kicked in as he sensed something. Whereas he turned around slightly, he saw Bawako and Taji fall dead, and with a black hooded stranger wearing a orange mask with black wavy lines on it and a single eye hole on the right side on it. At the same time that Janae had turned around slightly, the black hooded stranger threw a kunai at him, eyeing for the buckle of his neck. Janae had tried to move, but the kunai came at him too fast for him to fully avoid, where it slashed the side of his neck, causing blood to gush out of it and Janae to fall to the ground. As he fell, the black-hooded stranger quickly took Naruto from him and held him in front of Minato and Kushina in a threatening manner. "Yundaime Hokage, Minato, back away from the Jinchuriki, or your son dies at the ripe old age of 1 minute." When Minato saw the hooded stranger, he could not help but wonder who he was and how he broke through the protected barrier around the hideout. It was as he was thinking of this that Kushina suddenly started to scream out in pain as the seal was weakening and the Kyuubi was trying to get out. "Back away from the Jinchuriki, or don't you care if your son dies?" asked the hooded stranger, as he threatened to killing the no-crying baby Naruto with a kunai in his hand. "Now hold it, Jay, just calm down," spoke Minato frightened-like, as he feared for his just-born son life. "You should take your own advice, Minato." "I perfectly calm," spoke the hooded stranger, as threw Naruto into the air and was about to stab the falling baby Naruto with the kunai. But just as he was about to stab Naruto, there was a sudden yellow flash and Naruto disappeared and reappeared with Naruto in his arms on the wall. "You certainly live up to the yellow flash moniker, Hokage-san," spoke the stranger when he saw Minato on the wall with the wailing Naruto. At the same time, Janae, who was still alive despite his wound, reappeared behind the hooded stranger with his black katana in hand and slashed at the hooded stranger, only to much of his shock and everyone else's in the room, the blade just passed right through him. At this the stranger disappeared and reappeared at the other end of the room, and looked at Janae, who was still bleeding badly from the wound in the side of his neck and was panting heavily. "So you're still alive. It's impressive that you're able to dodge the lethal blow of my kunai to the extent that you did in the time you had, and even more so, that you can move as fast as you can while still bleeding like that. But then again, I shouldn't be that surprised. You Akechis have a rather nasty habit of never going down easily and always have to make things difficult," remarked the hooded stranger. "Who are you?" asked Janae angrily, as he held his sword up and at the same time fighting off the dizziness and keeping himself steady, as the loss of blood was making it hard for him to stay focused on his opponent. The hooded stranger did not answer Janae's question, but did ask them both something else. "Tell me, what will you both do now?" Not getting what the hooded stranger meant at first, Janae quickly looked at the corner of his eye at Minato and Naruto. It was then that Minato noticed the explosive notes that were now stuck to the bottom of cloth that Naruto was wrapped in. Seeing them as well, Janae quickly pushed himself forward and ran to Naruto and Minato, to try and save Naruto. At the same time, Minato quickly swiped Naruto out of his cloth, just as the notes were about to explode, and when Janae arrived next to Minato and Naruto and took a hold of Naruto, at the moment that Minato used his Harenkyaku no Jutsu, God Step technique, to transported Janae, Naruto and himself to his home. Janae quickly took the cloth off Naruto and threw it away, where he and the Yondaime with Naruto quickly jumped out of the house just as the notes exploded and blew the house up. Both Janae and Minato landed roughly on the ground near one another, while Minato still clung to the wailing Naruto. Quickly the Yondaime looked down at his wailing son to see if he was hurt. "Thank God, you're not hurt," said Minato, before quickly turning to his elder son next to him, "Janae, are you?" "I'm fine," grunted Janae as he pulled out a piece of wood that was stabbed in his arm from the explosion. "How's Naruto?" he asked with concern as he turned to Minato and Naruto, who was still crying. "He's okay," replied Minato with relief as he was galled that both his sons were okay, after which he cringed slightly in pains as a piece of wood was stuck in his leg, which was no doubt because of the explosion. When Janae pulled the piece of wood out of his leg, Minato then spoke to him. "He's after Kushina. He forced me to use my Harenkyaku no Jutsu to separate us from him, as he knew you would go next to me when you saw Naruto was in danger, and I would transport us both away from him and Kushina." "Yes, I know," replied Janae seriously. "We gotta hurry then," said Minato as he transported Janae, Naruto and himself to the Hokage's underground shelter. Once there, Minato quickly handed Janae, Naruto, who was still crying. "Janae, you watched and care for Naruto here, as you both be safe here, I going to get Kushina." Janae just nodded. Even though he wanted to go with Minato and get the hooded stranger, he knew that in the state he was in he would be no help to Minato and just be a hindrance to the Yondaime, when fighting against the hooded stranger. As soon as Minato left, Janae quickly calmed the crying Naruto down and then placed him in the small bed in the shelter to sleep, after which Janae then went to the nearby press and got some cloths and things and started to treat his wounds with the limit healing jutsus he knew, after which he then took a blood pill so to replace the blood that he had lost. As soon as he was finished tending to himself, Minato reappeared with Kushina in his arms. "Kushina, is she okay?" asked Janae as he went over to her and Minato. At this a dark look came over Minato, one that Janae had not seen other than on the battlefield against Iwa. "No. I was too late to stop him. He was able to extract the Kyuubi from Kushina." At this Janae quickly turned to Kushina, whose skin was pale white, sweating and panting heavily. Upon seeing and hearing this, Janae quickly knew what that meant. Kushina was going to die, there was no question. It was a miracle that she was even still alive after the Kyuubi was extracted from her. Minato then quickly laid Kushina next to the sleeping Naruto, where she quickly took a hold of her sleeping baby, knowing that she did not have long left and wanted to be with and hold on to her son for as long as possible. A pained look came across both Minato's and Janae faces, where then both tightened their fists in anger, knowing who was responsible for this happy day turning into a night of pain, suffering and sorrow. "Janae, I want you to stay here with Kushina and Naruto," and spoke Minato, but was interrupted by Janae turning him with a cold anger look at him. "The hell am I not staying here while you go fighting the Kyuubi and that man? I'm going out there, and when I find him I will kill him myself," spoke Janae as even despite his anger towards Kushina, he still cared what happened to her, and after what the hooded Stanger had done to her and tried to do to Naruto, he wasn't going to rest until he held that man's still beating heart in his hand and rammed it down his throat. "Janae, I don't have time to argue you, so for once listen to me and add the Yondaime," but before he could finish, the weakened Kushina spoke up. Min Minato, let Janae go. I will be fine. You need him more out there than I need him here." At this the Hokage's eyes softened and relented. "Fine then. Janae, I need you to go out to the village and warn them, and then lead the force to try and hold the Kyuubi back until Konoha can fully mobilize its forces." At this Janae nodded and then shunshined, body flicker, away. Once Janae was gone, Kushina spoke again. "Minato. Thank you. Good luck. Minato then turned around and put on his long trench coat. "I'll be back before you know it," he said before he disappeared in a yellow flash. 3 hours later. 3 hours after the Kyuubi was sighted, a fierce battle was raging between the forces of Konoha and the Kyuubi. The battle had started when the vanguard of 80 shinobis led by Jané engaged Kyuubi. They were able to delay the Kyuubi for about an hour before it reached Konoha main defense line, which stood right in front of Konoha. Konoha forces fought hard against the Kyuubi and held it back, but after 2 hours of fierce fighting, the Konoha defense line was on the verge of collapsing. As the Anbu commander tried to reorganize the defense line, he suddenly heard a voice calling out to him. "Wolf, what is going on?" When the Anbu commander Wolf turned around, he saw a badly wounded Jané coming towards him. His clothes were tattered and were covered in dried blood and was clutching his side, which was badly bandaged up and bleeding fresh blood. He had several cuts on his face and his uniform was badly torn up where it showed more cuts. There was also several chakra burns on his skin along with bruises as well. "Jané, you're alive. Where are the rest of your men? When we lost contact with you and the others, we thought the Kyuubi had killed you all," spoke the Anbu commander. "All the others are dead, I'm the only one left." "So what's the situation?" spoke Jané as he held his side since he was clearly in a lot of pain. "The main line is about to collapse. We can't keep the Kyuubi back from Konoha any longer." "Where the Yondaime? Shouldn't he be here?" replied Jané. "The Hokage has yet to appear at all. I sent word requesting him to the front line, but he sent word back saying that we are to hold the line for as long as possible and that he was preparing for a jutsu to stop the Kyuubi." At this, Jané frowned since he was unsure of what kind of jutsu would stop the Kyuubi, but if it was time he needed, then it was time they would give him. "Wolf, how long would you need to reform the main defense line?" "About 15 minutes, but why?" "Because I'm going to give you those 15 minutes, replied Jané. "Jané, you can't be serious, you're wounded enough as it is, besides there's no way you can hold Kyuubi by yourself, you need a summons like the Toads or some other large summons to do that," spoke the Anbu commander. Jané just ignored him and then began to prepare to use one of his signature jutsus that he had created. The jutsu was called Harenkyaku no Jutsu, which Jané created to rival his father's Hiraishin no Jutsu, Flying Thunder God technique. The Harenkyaku no Jutsu allowed Jané to travel great distances within seconds with a single step. The technique worked where he would gather chakra under his feet and release it when there was a certain amount under his feet and would then let it all go in a single burst. After which he would ride them the small shock blast to his desired locations, much like the gliding on air in a single step at astonishing speed. The technique could nearly rival Jané father's Hiraishin no Jutsu in speed and deadliness. Although the only flaws with it were that it put a great deal of stress on Jané's body and took very good control of chakra to do the technique correctly. After Jané had gathered enough chakra, he disappeared in a gust of wind and a small shock blast, right in front of the Anbu commander. Knowing that he could not stop Jané, the Anbu commander decided to use whatever little time Jané could give them and started to give out orders to his men and reform the defense line. As this was happening, Jané suddenly appeared right on the snout of the Kyuubi, and before the Kyuubi could fully realize that Jané was on its nose, Jané slashed at the Kyuubi eyes, temporarily blinding the demon and halting its advance on Konoha. When Jané slashed its eyes, the Kyuubi howled and roared in pain and started to trash around, but soon enough the Kyuubi's healing powers quickly healed its eyes. But when the Kyuubi eyes were healed, Jané used his Harenkyaku no Jutsu to disappear again and reappear on the Kyuubi's back. He then channeled his chakra into his sword, which activated its special ability to generate black lightning around it, allowing it to cut or pierce almost anything. After which he then stabbed his sword into the Kyuubi's back. Although the lightning-charged sword stab did little to truly hurt the Kyuubi, it still caused it monetary pain, much like a wasp stinging a person, and kept the Kyuubi distracted. After stabbing the Kyuubi, Jané used his Harenkyaku no Jutsu to appear on another part of the Kyuubi's body and hit it with another attack. For the next 20 minutes this continued, where Janae would slash and attack all around Kyuubi's body with different jutsus and attacks and would use his Harenkyaku no Jutsu to appear on different parts of its body after each attack. The reason for this method of attacking the Kyuubi was not meant to stop, wound or defeat the Kyuubi but to distract it and give the defense forces time to reorganize. It also succeeded in annoying the Kyuubi as well, since although the attacks did little than sting him, it greatly irritated it at the fact that these stings were happening all over his body. Not to mention the fact that he could not swat Janae away and kill him, since he was too small and fast to hit, like a wasp flying around a person and stinging him, her. But unfortunately after 20 minutes of doing this, the effects of doing Harenkyaku no Jutsu for so long in his wounded state started to take effect on Janae, where it was becoming more and more difficult to constantly use and maintain it. Eventually the Kyuubi got a lucky swing with one of its tails and hit Janae hard and sent him through Konoha's main wall and through a house which collapsed on him. But thankfully Janae's efforts were not in vain, since he had bought the Konoha Defense Forces vital time to reorganize their positions and were able to hold the Kyuubi back for another 20 minutes. After which the Yondaime arrived on top of Gamabunta and used the Shiki Fujin, dead demon-consuming seal, and sealed the Kyuubi into the Naruto. After the battle, Janae was found by several shinobis and had somehow survived being hit by the Kyuubi and having a house fall on top of him along with the other injuries he suffered. But even though he had survived, he was in a coma for about 3 months. 3 months later, when Janae awoken, he was greeted by Sarutobi and Jiraiya, who had returned after hearing of the attack. "Good afternoon, Janae. I'm glad to see that you have awakened," spoke Sarutobi in a grandfatherly manner. "Where am I?" groaned Janae as he felt stiff and very sore. "You're in the hospital. You been in a coma for 3 months, brat," answered Jiraiya, who was glad to see Janae alive and awake. 3 months, said Janae as he sat up but suddenly fell back down on the bed due to the pain his body was in. "What happened to the Kyuubi?" croaked Janae. "The Kyuubi was defeated by Minato not long after you were hit by the Kyuubi and sent through the main wall," said Sarutobi. "How?" asked Janae. "You're fath," spoke Sarutobi but quickly stopped when Janae gave him a look, when he called Minato his father and quickly rephrased what he was about to say. Minato used the Shiki Fujin that he created to rip out the Kyuubi's soul and seal it away, answered Sarutobi, after which he continued. Unfortunately, due to the jutsu, Minato had to give up his life and have the Shinigami, death god, devour his soul to use the jutsu to defeat the Kyuubi. "Yes, I'm aware of the jutsu and what price the user has to pay to use it," replied Janae emotionlessly, since on the few and short conversation he had with the Yondaime, he mentioned the jutsu to Janae and what it did. Janae knew that the jutsu invoked the powers of the Shinigami, in which the Shinigami would use the user as a kind of avatar, where once the user grabs onto the opponent, the Shinigami would then pull out the opponent's soul and seal it into the user. After the sealing was completed, the Shinigami would then consume the soul of both the user and the opponent, sentencing them both to an eternity of battle with one another in its stomach. When Janae realized this, he remained silent, since he did not know how he should feel, since although he still hated the Yondaime for being responsible for his mother's death, the man did give his life to protect and save others, something even Janae could not help but respect and admire. "What of Kushina? Is she?" asked Janae neutrally. At this both Jiraiya and Sarutobi faces saddened. "Yes, Janae, she is. We found her body in the Hokage's shelter not long after the Kyuubi was defeated," spoke Sarutobi sorrowfully. At this Janae lowered his head, not surprised, as like all Jinchuriki, once the demon the house is extracted they would die from the result of the painful extraction. It was just a miracle the Kushina survived it for as long as she did. "In Naruto?" asked Janae as fear began to clutch at his chest. At which the two men looked at each other but said nothing. "What happened to my brother?" cried Janae angrily as he stood up despite the pain, since he wanted answers. "Janae, don't push yourself," warned Jiraiya. "You were already badly wounded before you took on the Kyuubi by yourself, and you were at death's doorstep after they found you underneath that house. It's a miracle that you're even alive. I don't care. Tell me what happened to Naruto, or I swear on my mother's grave I will tear this building down brick by brick until I find him," cried Janae angrily. "Janae, Naruto is dead," said Sarutobi without any emotion. "What?" cried Janae as he didn't believe what he was hearing. "Naruto is dead," repeated Sarutobi. "We found Naruto with Kushina body, and he was alive and was put in a baby incubator by a nurse, when he was brought to the hospital. During which the incubator failed due to a power outage as QB attack had damaged some of the power lines and the nurse and doctors were too busy with the wounded to notice what had happened. With the sudden temperature drop, Naruto fragile organs were damaged and he got sick. He died the following week," said Sarutobi as he lowered his gaze so not to look Janae in the face. When Janae heard this he couldn't believe it. His brother was dead, the only family he had left in the world was dead. After hearing this, Janae began to hyperventilate and then started to have a panic attack. Sarutobi and Jiraiya quickly went over to Janae and after a few minutes they were able to calm Janae down, where he then asked to see Naruto's body if it hadn't been buried yet. Sarutobi and Jiraiya then brought Janae, who was on a wheelchair, to the morgue, where Sarutobi revealed the dead body of baby Naruto, to Janae while Jiraiya stayed outside the morgue. After a minute or so of looking at the lifeless body of his dead baby brother, Janae looked away since he couldn't stand looking at him like that. Janae then pushed himself away and started to head back out the morgue, but before he could leave, Sarutobi called out to him. "Janae." To which Janae stopped but did not turn around. "I know this is not really the right time or place, but I thought you should know, based on the reports that I received from the Anbu commander and those that fought at the battle against the Kyuubi. Both I along with the Council of Elder Shinobis have decided that you will be given the rank of Jonin Commander, as a token of gratitude, for your courage and valor in the battle against the Kyuubi. Since the defense line would have surely have fallen had you not delayed the Kyuubi. You are also be given the same travel rights and other privileges that both Tsunade and Jiraiya have, since I know you have many painful memories here. So I thought it might be best that you could leave for a while and grieve in your own way and sort yourself out. Thank you, Sarutobi. I will take your offer, and once I have recovered and I will leave, since I think it is best I leave the village for now. Also, if you don't mind, I would like to be alone right now," said Janae with turning to Sarutobi. "Of course." After which Janae left the morgue. For the next 3 months Janae stayed in the hospital so that he could recover and do his physiotherapy. Due to the fact that he was recovering, he could not go to Naruto funeral, which Sarutobi told him took place a few days after he went to see his body. 5. During those 3 months Janae had no visitors other than the Sandaime. 6. After he had fully healed, Janae gathered his belongings at his family home and took some scroll that the Yondaime had in his home on ceiling and then left. End flashback. When Janae finished remembering the events that lead him to unknowingly leave Naruto alone in a village full of people that hated him, he could not help but feel the rising rage inside him grow more and more. As well as the growing urge telling him to go and find Sarutobi and Jiraiya and rip both of them apart limb by limb with his bare hands. But he quickly calmed himself down and decided to focus on Naruto first and deal with Sarutobi and the others later. After calming down, Janae suddenly felt 2 familiar presences enter the room. "Sensei. What's wrong?" "I sensed a surge of your chakra as well as a small bit of your killing intent as we were traveling in the village, and thought you were under attack, so we tracked you here," spoke Saya as she revealed her face, which showed that she was a young and attractive girl with white hair that reached down to her lower back and tied the lower parts into a ponytail so that it went down further. Her hair also fell down to her face, where she had it parted on the left side and with one long piece falling over her right eye. She also had red eye and a sharp but well-sculpted face. 7. I'm fine, Saya. I was just dealing with some trash that were attacking this boy, answered Janae. But why were they attacking him? Asked Ketsu, who revealed his face, which showed that he was a handsome young man with a shaped sculpted face with long bright blue hair that he had tied into a ponytail and had bright blue eyes. 8. Because he is a Jinchuriki, answered Janae, shocking both students. But if he is a Jinchuriki, then that would mean that he is the Jinchuriki for the Kyubi no Yoko, since all the other Bijus are have sealed into hosts among the other shinobi nations, spoke Ketsu. But I thought you said the Kyubi was killed sensei when the Yondaime sealed it within him with his Shiki Fujin, dead demon consuming seal, said Saya. That was what I believed as well, until I saw him with the whisker markings on his face and a Hake no Fuan Shiki, 8 trigram seal, replied Janae neutrally. Do you know who he is, sensei? Asked Saya. Yes. His name is Naruto. He is my younger brother. When Saya and Ketsu heard this, they could not believe their ears. Brother. But sensei, you said that your brother died during the Kyubi attack, spoke Ketsu in shock. That was what I was told and I believed. Clearly I was lied to and tricked. Are you certain, that he your brother, sensei? Asked Saya, who was also still in shock. But why did they tell you that he was dead? Asked Ketsu. I am unsure as to why, but I do have a theory, but I will need to confirm it first, spoke Janae, after which he then turned to Ketsu. Ketsu, I need you to heal Naruto since he was injured from the attack. Right, sensei, said Ketsu, after which he took out a bottle full of water and drew the water out of it and the water covered his hands. After which Ketsu then channeled his chakra into the water around his hands and put his water-covered hand on Naruto's revealed stomach and said, Chiyu-mizu Jutsu, healing water technique. This was a technique that Ketsu had developed himself during his training with Janae. Ketsu used his high water affinity to cover his hands with water and use it as a catalyst by sending healing chakra into the water. After which Ketsu would then have the water spread around the person body and help accelerate a person naturally healing both internally and externally. The technique work on similar lines of the Shozen Jutsu, mystical palm technique, but much faster, and unlike that technique, Chiyu-mizu Jutsu could even heal old wounds and scars, leaving no trace of the on the person body. When Ketsu cried out the jutsu, the water on his hands started to glow white and spread all over Naruto's body and seeping into his wounds. After a while, Janae and Saya saw the wounds, both old and new, healing and disappearing. 15 minutes later, Ketsu stopped healing and let out an exhausted sigh, since the techniques took a lot of chakra, focus and concentration, before turning around. He should be fine now, sensei. All he needs now is rest to recover his strength, spoke Ketsu. Good work, Ketsu, spoke Janae, after which he then went next to Naruto, had point his to front fingers on Naruto's forehead. Sensei, what are you doing? Asked Saya. I going to use my Rinamoi no Jutsu, mind meld technique, to merge Naruto's and my mind together so that I can see his memories and find out exactly what kind of life Naruto has had here, replied Janae. Rinamoi no Jutsu was a technique Janae had created back when he was in the Anbu division, when he was in it. Back then Janae had spent some time in the Anbu interrogation division. During his time there, Janae had studied under Yamanaka Inoichi, the head of the Anbu interrogation division. He had gone to Anbu interrogation division so that he could learn how to interrogate enemy prisoners on the field correctly. During that time he witnessed Inoichi use the various different mind-manipulating techniques that the Yamanaka clan used. When studying under Inoichi, Janae learned the basic principle of the jutsus by watching him, where he was then able to create his own mind-manipulating technique based on their jutsus. As the name suggests, the Rinamoi no Jutsu allows Janae to merge his mind with a person so that he and a person could share information and memories with one another. It also made a useful interrogation tool since the person with the strongest will could control what they shared. Hence, if Janae mind meld with a person and his will was stronger, then he could see all that person memories without showing any of his or learn everything that person knows. But the drawback to this jutsu was if the other person had a stronger will than Janae, then they could make Janae show all his memories and learns all that he knows. Are you sure that why, sensei? Asked Ketsu. Yes. Since it's the only way I will be able to know what he'd been through and what they've been doing to him, replied Janae, where he then did a few one-handed hand signs and then spoke out. Rinamoi no Jutsu. Naruto mind. Jane appeared in a large open hallway. At the end of the hallway he saw several doors marked, memories, thought, subconscious, and Kyuubi cage. Seeing the doors, Jane went into the one he wanted, the memories, after which when he entered he found himself in an empty room, but as soon as the door to the room closed the room began to change. This was normal, since this was how he would see Naruto's memories. First memory. Naruto was laying in his crib, no more than a few days after the Kyuubi attack. He was wide awake and was viewing his surroundings. Suddenly the door to the nursery opened, revealing a nurse that whom Jane recognized as a younger version of the same nurse he had met earlier, with a scalpel in her hand. She walked over to Naruto's crib and sneered, "Demon, I am going to enjoy this so very much," spoke the nurse as she held the scalpel in her hand. "Time to die, demon." She brought the scalpel down, about to drive it into Naruto's heart when the doors were slammed open as a man with white hair and a white dog mask, whom Jane recognized as Kakashi, and a man with spiked brown hair and a bear mask, whom Jane recognized as Tenzo, grabbed her arms. But as the scalpel fell from her hand it hit Naruto and pierced into his side. The nurse then began to yell, "No! Let me go! The demon has to die, he has to die!" The woman was then struck in her left temple as she was dragged out of the room. Not even a minute later Rin, whom Jane recognized as Kakashi's now deceased team member, ran into the room. Her eyes widened as she yelled out to Kakashi and Tenzo, "Kakashi, Tenzo, get me some coagulants now, we need to stop his bleeding fast." When Jane saw still he narrowed his eyes and swore when he saw that nurse again he would skin her alive, slowly. Second memory. Naruto was sitting in a closet, clutching a blanket to himself. He was no more than a year old, and he was living in the dampest part of the orphanage, the basement. He had not been given any food in several days, and was incredibly hungry. He coughed up a bit blood since he looked ill and was very pale and tried to find some warmth in the blanket that he had, which had moth holes in it, and it was so thin it might as well be paper. Naruto curled up in the corner of the room as he began to try and sleep, but as he did, tears could be seen falling from his eyes and he began to cry himself to sleep, asking out to no one why he was treated like this and why was he alone. When Jane saw this, 2 single tears fall from his eyes and he began to curse himself to the lowest pits of hell for not being there to protect his brother when he needed him. After regaining control of himself, Jane then swore that after he had dealt with Sarutobi and the council he would find the person in charge of the orphanage and he would then rip out the person's spine with his bare hands. Third memory. Naruto was walking around town looking for work so that he could earn a little bit extra money to buy more food, since he only got the bare minimum amount from social welfare, which was nearly enough to go by since he was overcharged for almost everything in the village by the stores. As he walked around he saw a sign on the window of a restaurant that said it looking for a wash boy to do dishes and in return would get a free meal. When Naruto saw this he slowly walked over into the restaurant and saw the head waiter setting up tables for customers. "Excuse me," asked Naruto timidly, "I hear for the wash boy job that you are offering here." "Of course now do yo," spoke the head waiter as he turned around. He then saw that he was talking to Naruto. "You. Get of here you demon scum. Please. I didn't do anything, I'm just looking for some work and some food," pleaded Naruto as he backed away in fear. "I wouldn't give you the scraps of my dog, now get out," roared the waiter as he grabbed Naruto and threw him out onto the street. When Naruto picked himself up he saw one of the cooks throwing a bag full of scraps and spoiled food into the large bin next to the restaurant. Once the cook was gone Naruto snuck over to the bin and opened the bag open and began to hungrily eat the scraps and spoil food, not caring that they would make him sick later on. Jane began to once again lose control of his emotions and as he did he began to visualize all the different things that he would do to the people that had gone out of their way to be cruel to his brother. He made a mental note to burn that restaurant down with that head waiter in it. Third memory. Naruto laid in his hospital bed, bound by restraints, completely. A doctor looked over him with a sick expression as he examined the wounds on Naruto's body. It seems that the demon isn't healing him at the moment. Oh well, he picked up a set of sewing needles. This just means I can do more to him. He sat next to the blonde and shoved the cold needles into his flesh. Ag! Naruto shouted in pain as he tried to squirm, only for the doctor to backhand him. Shut your mouth, demon. Be glad I am healing your wounds, you filthy monster. He continued to forcibly shove the needles into his sensitive flesh, until one of the gaping wounds was sealed shut. The doctor grinned as he pulled out some more thread. 1 down, 10 to go. As Jeanne watched this, he started clench his fist so tightly that his hands started to bleed. That monster. He dares calls himself a doctor. When I find him, there will not be enough of him left to be even identified. Fourth memory. Naruto was strapped to a table in the hospital, needles digging into his flesh, connected to tubes filled with chemicals he had no knowledge about. The door was slammed open by a different doctor this time, who had a crazed grin on his face. I must say I never would have thought the demon could possibly be useful. But here you are, perfect for my studies and experimentation. He went to the tubes and squeezed one of the packs. This little demon is a nice little chemical I whipped up. It is an amazing steroid for chakra. However, I have yet to put it through any living trials, and I have no intention on using on another human being yet. So, I decided to use it on you. He squeezed the bag, forcing the chemical to flow through the tube. As it entered Naruto's bloodstream, the veins and chakra network began to stretch and convulse, causing him immense pain. Ag! Were it not for the many years on the battlefield, Jeanne would have vomited from this sight, but it still made him sick. As he watched this horror show, he swore his hunt that doctor down and let him know what it felt like to be vivisected. Fifth memory. Naruto was running for his life. It was October 10th, his birthday, and he was only 4 years old. Behind him was a mob of drunken civilians, and a few tipsy shinobi. He turned down an alley, only to run into a large man with a sake bottle in his mouth. He spilled the sake all over himself as he fell backwards. He looked to see Naruto, and immediately made a grab for him. He used Demon, Gret Brack, Burp, Hair. Naruto was about to run out of the alley, when the mob cornered him and forced him back in the alley. The large man grabbed Naruto and slammed him against the wall. A shinobi, who was partially buzzed, get the demon. He shattered his sake bottle and stabbed Naruto in the chest, while other members of the mob stabbed in the stomach, face, back, and anywhere else they could get a hit in. By the end of it, Naruto had puncture wounds all over his body. His face was so cut up, the flesh might as well be held on by a thread. The rest of his body looked like it had been put through a meat grinder. The last member of the mob poured a bottle of sake over him and pulled out a match. Bye-bye, demon brat. He dropped the match, and caught the blonde on fire. Only part of him was burning, but it still hurt like hell. Naruto screamed in pain as he rolled on the ground, trying to put out the fire. The mob just laughed as one of the men grabbed the singed blonde and tossed him into a small trash can, before he threw all the broken bottles in with him. Jeanne garnished his teeth in rage. He could barely continue his anger. Normally Jeanne was a calm and collect person, and it would take a great deal to make him lose it. But now he wanted nothing more than to go and hunt down every one of these monsters, and give them a first-hand experience as to why he was known as the Hitokiri, the manslayer. Sixth memory. Naruto was running from a mob who was screaming things like, demon, and, hell spawn. He tried to run into a store, only for more people to come out screaming insults at him. He turned around to see that the mob had completely surrounded him. The one up front yelled, "Kill the demon." In moments he had been swarmed by the dozens of people. They were beating and bludgeoning him as another member of the mob yelled out, "Hey, I have a few things we can try." He pulled out several throwing knives and told a couple people to hold up the blonde. Naruto was hoisted off the ground as the men began to cackle like idiots. Let him have it. The first knife was launched directly into Naruto's stomach, just barely missing anything vital. Naruto screamed in pain as another member of the mob threw a bunch of kunai at him. He was then pinned to the ground as a woman walked up with a cat of 9 tails. I am sure you are going to like this 9-tailed whip, string him up. A bunch of people from the mob grabbed Naruto and held him in place, tearing off the back of his shirt. She grinned, take this, crack, the 9 whips slashed against Naruto's flesh, leaving 9 deep slashes in his back. His screams cut through the air as the mob began to laugh at his misfortune. Crack, the whip cut into his flesh again. The mob continued to do this until someone yelled out, hey, the Hokage and his Anbu are coming this way, let's get out of here. The mob scattered and left Naruto to bleed in the street. Quote exclamation mark. Roared Jane. He knew he hadn't even watched even half of what Naruto went through in the past 12 years and yet he could barely watch any more of his brother's suffering. Damn you Namikaze. Damn you to the lowest pits of hell, thought Jane furiously. He was so angry right now, he would offer his very soul to the Shinigami himself just so that he could find Namikaze and beat himself for all of entirety for what he put his brother through. 7th memory. Naruto was walking down the street on his way home. He was about to turn an alley. Ah, get away from me. Naruto looked back and saw a woman being dragged into an alley. He ran to the alley and saw the 2 men ripping off her clothes while simultaneously fondling her. Oh, don't worry, girl, this is going to feel great. He grabbed her panties and was about to pull down his pants. Hey you, leave her alone. He turned to see a blonde-haired blue-eyed kid run at them with a chair. Before they could figure out what had happened, Naruto had smashed them in the face with the chair. The 2 men quickly yelled, the demon is attacking us, aahhh, and quickly ran down the alley. Naruto turned to the woman with a smile. Hi there, I don't think that they will. Naruto was kicked in the face by the woman who screamed. Help, the demon is going to rape me. A bunch of people saw the woman's state of dress at the end of the alley and saw Naruto on the ground. Hey, get the demon now. Naruto tried to run, only for the woman to trip him and begin stomping on his knee. The mob began to beat him when the woman pulled up a trash can, take this demon, and smashed it over his head. Naruto remained conscious as the blood began to pour from the top of his head. Ungrateful whore, spat Jane as he showed how he was treated for saving the women from being raped. He wished he could somehow take part in these memories and snap the necks of each and every one of these pieces of scum and throw their remains to the wolves. 8 memory. Naruto was thrown into a pit as a bunch of civilians began to pour the water from their latrines and gasoline into it. One of the civilians began to laugh. Oh, how do you like this? Burning in a pile of shit, a degrading way for a demon to die. He lit a match. So long. Naruto looked around and prayed he could find a way out. When he saw a hole in the wall of the pit, he ran towards it just as the match hit the sewage and gas. Naruto crawled through the hole but got stuck. His entire lower body was set ablaze. Aaggghhhh. Naruto used what strength he had in his upper body and pulled himself through the rest of the way. He quickly began to roll around in the dirt and cried as he tried to put out the fire. The mob began to cheer about the demon's death, and slowly began to leave. Naruto stayed in the hole, as his legs were so burned that he could barely use them properly. He curled himself into a corner and began to sing to himself, happy birthday, to me, happy birthday to me. And they call him a demon. These pieces of filth would not know a real demon if they saw right in front of them, though Jane angrily. 9th memory. Naruto's door was kicked open by 2 men wearing shinobi attire. Well, looky what we have here, a little demon all by himself. Hey, how about we have some fun? The man looked at Naruto as he pulled out a hammer, pin him down. Naruto tried to run but the men were too fast. Naruto was thrown to the ground as the men pinned his arms down. The man with the hammer walked over to Naruto. So the little demon wants to become a ninja. Let's see how he becomes one after all his fingers have been destroyed. The man smashed the hammer down on Naruto's pinky finger. Aaggghhh. The man continued with the rest of his fingers, smashing the hammer down on each one until it broke into several pieces. Well, looks like he won't be taking up our career now, will he? Naruto was whimpering as he tried to struggle. Oh, shut up. The man smashed the hammer into Naruto's jaw, breaking it in 3 places, and knocking him unconscious. Bastards. And they dare call themselves men. They will pay for this in blood, I swear it. When I find them I will gut them like fish and strangle them with their own intestines, snarled Jane in his mind. 10th memory. Naruto was sitting on the sidewalk in the middle of the night. He had not found anything to eat in the garbage cans, and was extremely hungry, as he had not eaten anything in weeks. Naruto sighed and looked up at the sky, which was starting to darken. He knew it was about to rain, and decided it would be best if he headed towards the woods. He got up and was about to walk down the street. Why, hello there. He froze and turned around, expecting to see another mob, instead seeing a lovely-looking woman carrying an umbrella. What are you doing out here so late at night? Naruto shivered, fearing the woman. Anyo, I have no place to go. The woman frowned. Ah, you poor thing. She leaned down and pinched his cheek. Who wouldn't want to take in such a cutie? Naruto looked up at the woman with hope in his eyes. Really? The woman smiled. Of course. In fact, why don't you come home with me? I always wanted a son. Naruto smiled and nodded his head eagerly as he followed the woman down the streets. They walked past many buildings, heading deeper into town. Suddenly the woman stopped and turned to him, smiling softly. Here, my home is this way. She walked down an alleyway, and Naruto eagerly followed, never once thinking of the possible dangers of following the woman. The woman suddenly stopped in the middle of the alleyway and smiled at him. Well, here it is, my home. Naruto looked around. The entire area was just one big pile of rubble and debris. He looked at her. But, this is Naruto froze as a malicious grin crawled up the woman's face as she pulled out a knife. This is my home, demon. The one you destroyed while my newborn son was still inside. She sneered in disgust. I will make you suffer for taking my son from me, demon. She charged at Naruto and buried the knife in his shoulder. Aaghh. Naruto screamed in pain as he felt the knife tear through flesh, muscle, and bone, and fell over, blood dripping down his arm. The woman sneered in disgust and reached into her back, pulling out a piece of barbed wire coated in blood. How dare you scream in pain when my baby wasn't even allowed the chance to do so? She kicked Naruto in the face, making him fall onto his back. She walked up to him and unrolled the barbed wire, dangling it in front of his face. You see this, demon? She rolled up her sleeve, revealing deep scar marks. This is the barbed wire I got tangled with when you attacked, keeping me from saving my child. She wrapped the wire around Naruto's throat and began to squeeze, cutting deep into Naruto's flesh. How ironic that the thing that kept me from saving my child will be your death. Ha 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 ha. Blatch. The woman stopped strangling Naruto as a kunai was buried in her throat. Naruto fell to the ground, bleeding out, the last thing he saw being a woman with purple hair, whom Jane recognized as one of Kushina's former students, Azuki Yugao. That murder wrench, how dare she call herself a mother when she does that to an innocent child, raged Jane in his mind. If I had been there I would have crushed her skull with my bare hands and splattered it all over the wall. 11th memory. Naruto was sitting in his apartment alone, hungry, watching the other kids playing with their parents and the other brothers and sisters. He crawled into a nearby corner and curled into a ball, whimpering as he tried to hold in his tears. Ka-chan, Tu-san, where did you go? He tightened the ball he was in and sobbed. I want my Ka-chan, I want my Tu-san, where are you? Naruto sobbed into the night, an orphan on his own, at only 6 years old. When Jane saw this, hundreds of emotions ran through him until it was too much for him and did something he had never done, not since the death of his mother. He broke down and cried and banging on the ground. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. If I hadn't left, if I had stayed, none of the would have happened. I could have protected him, I could have been there for him. Forgive me, Naruto. Forgive me. I failed you, cried Jeanne. After a few minutes of this, Jeanne regained control of himself and lifted himself up and then began to watch the rest of Naruto's memories. He watched Naruto being tied to a practice pole with barbed wire around his wrists and ankles and was being covered in gasoline. He saw them light a match and throw it on him. The gasoline must have only been placed on certain parts of his body because the fire followed a line and burned his flesh. The fire made a bunch of cross shapes in his flesh. Not a moment later, an Anbu came in and cut down the assailants. The Anbu carefully doused the fire on the screaming blonde and cut the barbed wire off. He watched several other beatings and attack on his brother, such as when Naruto was beaten near death. With 5 broken ribs, a fractured femur, and a kunai shoved into his lung, and released the next day with any real medical care. Another one was when he was hung by his wrists and beaten with bats, both arms broken, every rib shattered, fractured skull, released next day again without any real medical care. The next one was when a group of Uchiha tied Naruto to a training post. He had 17 stab wounds from kunai, 20 from shuriken, released next day again without any real medical care. The rest of the memories all followed similar lines, which did not help Jeanne in his rising anger, which was about ready to erupt like a volcano. As he watches the memories, Jeanne noticed 2 blank spots in Naruto's memory and stopped the memories from continuing forward. At first, Jeanne thought it was a gap made by Naruto's subconscious to blank out memories that were too emotional hard on Naruto to remember. But as he looked deeper into these blank spots, he noticed that they did not have the consistency of being a subconscious memory blocks, since they were too precise and exact. It was then that Jeanne realized that the memory blocks were man-made. These blocks had been made by someone or someones who were skilled enough in Fuinjutsu and had enough knowledge about the mind to seal off and block exact memories in Naruto. After realizing this, Jeanne began to use his knowledge and skill on Fuinjutsu to open up these memories and find out who placed these blocks on Naruto. After few minutes, Jeanne was finally able to open up the blocks. Both had been tricky to open up and both styles seemed familiar, since every Fuinjutsu user and master has a certain style. But even though he had opened up these memories here, it was only a temporary job, since as soon as he was finished looking at these memories they would seal up again. The only way to fully get rid of these seals would be to go deeper into Naruto's mind and destroy them, and for that he needed Naruto to be awake and for him to trust him. After opening the memories, Jeanne then began to watch the memories. 12th memory. Naruto was walking up the stairs of the Hokage Tower after he got out of the hospital. He was going to ask Gigi to see if he can give him some scrolls to train with. At the very least he can get a jutsu that show everyone at school that he wasn't useless. Naruto arrived at the office and was about to knock on the door when he heard someone talking. Sarutobi, how many times do we have to tell you? You have to kill that wretched demon. It is a threat to our village, spoke a voice whom Jeanne recognized the voice as that old hag Udatane Kaharu. I concur. If that demon is allowed to grow stronger, then our village is doomed, said the other voice, whom Jeanne clearly recognized as of that old fart Mitokado Homura. I will not have Naruto killed. I have gone so far as to allow the villagers to beat him without persecution and not punish the few shinobi that attack him, but that's as far as I will go. Since if I tried, I know it would just divide the village and weaken it. I will not kill him, even if he was the Kyuubi, which he isn't. The risk of Kyuubi getting out is too damn high if he was killed. Besides, I have faith that Minato's seal will keep it contained if Naruto is kept alive. I had originally hoped that the villagers and shinobis would regard the Naruto as a hero, and although the most of the senior shinobis treat Naruto neutrally, the younger shinobis and the villagers treat him like he was the Kyuubi. This is why I'm trying to make sure that Naruto is kept alive and trying to make sure he's loyal to the village, since if he trained right and learns how to use the Kyuubi's power, he will become an unstoppable force that would protect Konoha just as Minato had wanted. That is too risky. Killing him would be more efficient. There is too much of a chance that he will betray us and turn against us, spoke Koharu. That's enough. My decision is final, dismissed. After which the doors bust open and Sarutobi and the other elders saw the shocked and betrayed look on Naruto's face. When Jane saw this, he began to snarl like a raging tiger. It made him all the angrier when he saw the pained look in Naruto's eyes at how his Gigi grandfather had been lying to him about why the villagers hated him and how he let them beat him. This betrayal was made all the worse since the Sandaime was one of the few people that Naruto believed truly cared about him. Jane then watched with a look of unbridled fury as the Sarutobi quickly grabbed Naruto and stopped him from running away. He then began to watch Sarutobi place a tracking ceiling on the back of Naruto's neck so that he could keep track of where Naruto was. This especially made Jane angry since it was illegal for a ninja to place a tracking seal on another person, who had broken no laws, and do it without their consent. After it was done, Sarutobi sealed Naruto's memories of the whole event away. Sarutobi, you traitorous piece of filth, you pay for what you done. I swear I will make you and Jiraiya suffer for what you done to Naruto and me. Konoha will drown in the blood of its own people for this, thought Jane furiously. After calming down a small bit, Jane began to watch the second memory that had been sealed away. 30th memory. Naruto was walking alone down the dark streets of Konoha in the late evening, since he had just come back from training in his secret training area away from everyone. As he walked down, he was suddenly jumped by a group of 4 men, jumped him from behind and dragged him into a dark alley. Naruto tried to fight back, and as he struggled he saw that 2 of his assailants were Hyuga. Due to their eyes, when Jane saw them he recognized their faces since they were members of the Hyuga main branch family. As he continued to struggle, Naruto saw his other 2 assailants were 2 men with long blonde ponytails. When Jane saw them he also recognized their faces and realized that they were both members of the Yamanaka clan. One of them was even Inoichi's younger cousin Sho, while the other was Sho's best friend. Eventually the 4 men were able to subdue Naruto, where 2 of the assailants held Naruto down, while the other 2 stood over him. One of the 2 was a Hyuga, whom Jane knew as Hori, while the other was Sho. Well, if it isn't the demon brat, just the person we've been looking for, sneered Sho. Let me go. I didn't do anything to you, said Naruto as he struggled. Not yet, you haven't, but you will in a few years' time, spoke Hori. Thanks to that soft-hearted fool the Hokage is allowing you to train in the academy and become a ninja, and once you become one, you will threaten our village. We are here to make sure you don't. What are you going to do to me? Asked Naruto as he continued to struggle against the 2 men. Normally we would kill you, but unfortunately that annoying healing ability of yours makes it hard to kill you, and even if we did we would have the Hokage coming after us, shaming both our clans, said Hori. But we can settle for making sure that you never become a ninja and making sure that you never threaten us again, said Sho, and he moved up to Naruto and started to drawing seals on Naruto's head. After Sho had done drawing the seals, Hori then went up and drew more seals on Naruto's chest. After they were done they activated them. Screamed Naruto, after which he then blacked out. When this memory ended he growled in anger. He recognized the seals that both men used. Both were highly illegal to use on people outside their clans. The one that Sho used was a mental seal that if used on full power could very well destroy a person's mind and leave them as a human vegetable. Jane guessed that Sho must have the seal at either a quarter or half strength, making it very hard for Naruto to focus or concentrate when learning, as well as understand things, making him look like a complete idiot. The seal was only meant to be used on criminals that had done serious crimes against the Yamanaka clan or traitors who had betrayed the clan. The technique itself was declared a forbidden jutsu by the clan and was only to be used on only the highest of crimes against the clan. The seal that Hori had used was a seal that was used on branch members back before the cage bird seal was created. The seal was designed to completely destroy a person's control and prevent them from focusing and using the chakra correctly. It was even used on captured enemies of the Hyuga clan during the Shinobi clan wars, where the Hyuga clan would put these seals on their prisoners and would keep them from escaping. But even if they did, they wouldn't be able to use their chakra anyhow thanks to the seal. The Hyuga clan later stopped using the seal on the branch members since the seal made them useless to protect the main branch, and they stopped using it on prisoners when they joined Konoha. Jane guessed that, like with Sho, Hori used the seal at quarter or half strength so to nearly ruin Naruto's control over his chakra. Jane also guessed that the only reason neither men used their seals at full strength was because if they used them at full strength, Sarutobi would investigate and find the seals on Naruto's body and would learn of their involvement due to the seals. But if they used the seals at a half or quarter strength, then it would have been enough to almost ruin Naruto's chances at being a ninja. Sho also must have blocked Naruto's memory of this so to make sure that he wouldn't mention this to Sarutobi. Jane then decided that once he gotten rid of those seals on Naruto's body and dealt with Sarutobi and a few others, he would make sure to pay Hori, Sho and both their friends a visit. After that, Jane watched the remainder of Naruto's memories and saw what other things happened to him, which didn't settle well with him at all. As he watched the memories, he did see that there was at least a small group that actually treated Naruto as a normal boy and actually tried to help him. Jane saw that Sume, head of the Inuzuka clan, who was an old friend of both his mother and Naruto's mother Kushina, tried to help Naruto by giving him small odd jobs in the Inuzuka kennel and paying him with some money or with a hot meal. She even chased away several mobs that tried to attack him or were attacking him. For that, Jane was deeply indebted to Sume. He had known her when he was growing up and thought of her as a kind of aunt. She had even helped him get through his mother's death and had several good memories at the Inuzuka kennel, where he often played and helped take care of the dogs there, since he found it relaxing and helped him forget his troubles for a time. Jane also saw a local ramen stand. Ichiraku Ramen had gone out of way to help Naruto by welcoming him in and treating him kindly. Even despite the business they lost for having the demon brat at their stand, they still welcomed him with open arms and even gave him free meals from time to time when he didn't have enough money. Jane also noticed that they were the main reason why he hadn't starved to death, or died of malnutrition, since Jane noticed from the memories that they added a lot of vitamins to his ramen, allowing him to eat a somewhat healthy diet. For that, Jane was forever grateful to them and planned to visit the family and thank them personally and pay them back for all their kindness. Jane also noted that the Aburame clan helped Naruto as well, since they knew what it was like to be thought as outcast for what was inside of them. He noted that several members of the Aburame clan helped save Naruto from several mob attacks, and they even helped Naruto out, having him do deliveries of the different types of goods that the Aburame clan made with their bugs' help. Where they pay him for the jobs he did, so that he have a little extra money. Jane was thankful for that and was not surprised by their action, since the Aburame clan did not take things at face value and did not let their emotions rule them. He had a good, strong relationship with the clan and held them in high regard and enjoyed speaking with them. This was because they always looked at the facts first and always took the logical approach in things. He only wished that the village had followed the Aburame clan example and used their heads instead of following their blind anger and bigotry. Jane also saw his mother, old teammate, and his godfather Kishin Tetsu helping Naruto out by giving Naruto odd jobs and discounts on ninja tools so that he could train. Jane was not surprised that Tetsu was among the few that treated Naruto like a person, since he knew Tetsu was a good and honorable man. Tetsu had helped Jane a great deal after his mother's death and was the one who taught him to make swords, hence he and Jane were quite close. Jane even saw that Naruto had a few friends in the heirs of the Nara and the Akamichi clans who, although did not help Naruto in any real way, they still treated him like a normal boy and did not tell their children to stay away from him, which was more that most families did. Jane even witnessed his friends Kaya Uchiha, one of the last 3 Uchihas in Konoha, and his sensei eldest daughter Hitomi Hyuga, both helping to protect Naruto several times from mobs of civilians and a few drunken or foolish chunins that had attacked him. After seeing this, Jeanne felt deeply indebted to them, especially when they each helped to try and heal Naruto wounds that he suffered from the attacks. Jeanne also saw from the memories that a teacher named Iruka, who even though had lost his parent in the Kyuubi attack, had a close relationship with Naruto. Although Jeanne saw that Iruka had held hatred for Naruto for a time, he had still treated Naruto like everyone else, but he eventually overcame that and saw Naruto for what he really was, a lonely boy. When Jeanne saw this, it just proved to him that Iruka was a better and wiser person than most of the people in Konoha. Jeanne also witnessed the night when Naruto was tricked into stealing the Forbidden Scroll by a ninja named Mizuki and everything that happened that night. When he finished watching the memory, Jeanne was proud of his brother for being able to master the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, Shadow Clone Technique, and the Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, Multiple Shadow Clone Technique, to such a level in such a short time. He also planned to personally thank Iruka for helping to save his brother and for everything else he did for him. Not to mention he planned to pay Mizuki a visit and thank him as well. After finishing watching the Naruto memories, Jeanne then began to plan what he was going to do next and how he was going to make Konoha pay for what they done to his brother. Outside the real world, as Jeanne was linked to Naruto's mind and watching his memories, Saya and Ketsu watch over him and Naruto, since Jeanne was basically helpless when he was linked with Naruto's mind. After about 15 minutes, Jeanne cancelled the Rinnemoy no Jutsu and his and Naruto minds separated. 9. When Jeanne cancelled the jutsu, both Saya and Ketsu went over to see how he was, but when they went over to him, they saw a dark, cold and murderous look in his eyes which made both students shiver in fear. Ketsu recognized this look. He had seen it once before, near around the first time he met his sensei. The last time he saw that look, over 500 Kiri ninjas died that day. Sensei, are you okay? Did you see something wrong? Asked Ketsu. I'm fine and yes I did, replied Jeanne shortly, since he was not in the mood to talk, after which he made a hand sign and made 2 shadow clones. After which he quickly began and ordered the first shadow clone of him to sneak into the Anbu file and archive room and return with what he wanted and return in 2 hours. While he ordered the other to go to a sealed location he knew of, and after which he then told the shadow clone what he wanted him to do. After which the clones nodded in understanding and left. Jeanne then told Ketsu and Saya to sneak into the hospital file room and find Naruto's medical files and make copies of them and then bring them to him. When they left, Jeanne then sat down and took out a few empty scrolls and a pen from his side pouch and began to write a letter. During the next 2 hours, Jeanne continued to write several different letters to people he knew. He only stopped to write when he received 2 storage scrolls from Ketsu and Saya, both of which continued all of Naruto's medical files that they copied, which according to Ketsu were all 10-inch thick and filled all the drawers of a large 4-door metal cabinet. This news had not shocked Zane since he had seen Naruto memories, hence he knew everything that Naruto went through. But this had shocked and horrified both Ketsu and Saya when they saw them, since they had read some of the files when they were making copies of them by use of a copying jutsu. After they had read some of the files, both of them agreed to do whatever their sensei asked them to do, since both of them agreed that Konoha needed to pay for what it had done to their sensei brother. Soon after, Jeanne's clones arrived where the one had sent to the Anbu Achieves and file room came in with 2 storage scrolls, while the second clone had 1 storage scroll in his hand. Both clone then gave their scrolls to him before disappearing. When the clones dispelled, he gained all the information that they learned when on their separate missions. When Jeanne gained this knowledge, he frowned and even growled a little when he received the information. Half an hour later, Jeanne finished writing. He then took one of the storage's scrolls that Ketsu and Saya gave him, as well as one of the storage's scrolls that his shadow clone gave him, and put them both in his pouch pack. He then took out another empty scroll and then drew a seal on the scroll, after which he placed his 2 forward fingers on the seal and did a few one-handed hand signs before crying out, Kinaniso no Jutsu, memory transfer technique. The seal that Jeanne had drew was a memory storage seal that he created along with Kinaniso no Jutsu, memory transfer technique, which like with the Rinnemoy no Jutsu was created based on Jane knowledge and understand of the mind manipulating techniques of Yamanaka clan. The jutsu stored a copy of all the memories that Jane and seen about Naruto's life and placed it in the seal. He planned on giving the scroll with the seal to a certain person so that they could see firsthand what Konoha had been doing to his brother. The seal worked where all the person would have to do was cut their finger and make it bleed a little and then place the finger on the seal so that they could see the memories stored in the seal. Jane also wrote instructions under the seal so that the person he was sending it to would know what to do. He then repeated the process with another scroll. After he finished rolling up the last scroll he was sending, Jane then lifted the left sleeve of his trench coat to relieve a dragon-shaped tattoo and bit his thumb to make it bleed and spread the blood on the tattoo and slammed his hand of the ground and cried out. Kuchio's no Jutsu, Summonjing Jutsu. When he did, a puff of smoke appeared in the air. After the smoke cleared, several small lizard-like creatures with wings appeared in the air, flapping their wings fast so to keep themselves in the air. These creatures were of Jane's dragon summons, but these were only young ones, hence they couldn't really fight, but could deliver messages for him very quickly. Each of these dragons were of different color. One was ruby red, another was emerald green, one was pitch black, while another was sapphire blue, the next was golden yellow, as well as another being silver gray and another bright white and others being of similar colors. What is it you wish of us, Jane-sama? Asked the young sapphire blue dragon in a small and cute-like voice. Seryu, I need you and your brothers and sisters to go and deliver these scrolls to certain people and bring their replies to me as quickly as you can, said Jane, to which the young dragon nodded. After giving the different scrolls to the young group of dragons and telling them each who to give the message and storage scrolls to, the group of dragons all disappeared in small puffs of smoke. After the young dragons disappeared, Jane told Saya and Ketsu to watch over Naruto while he sleeps and to make sure that no one but him comes into the room. He also told them to keep themselves hidden if Naruto woke up while he was away and that they were not to let him see them and were to follow him wherever he would go if he left the hospital. When Saya asked Jane where he was going, Jane simply replied, I have some busy with the Hokage and the council that is long overdue, and then left. The council room. After Jane's appearance in the village, Sarutobi had his Anbu go and inform the clan's heads, Kaharu, Homura, Danzo, the Anbu commander and the civilian council members of the council for an emergency council meeting. As Sarutobi sat in the Hokage's chair alone in the council room, he could not help but let out a tired sigh. He had feared that this day might come. Sarutobi had hoped by the time Jane returned to the village, the people of Konoha would have forgotten their hate of the Kyuubi and accept Naruto, where he in turn would have come to love the village and its people and want to protect them. Sarutobi had also thought that once Jane saw how happy Naruto was and how the people of Konoha had accepted him, he would forget his anger at being tricked and forgive him and believe it was the right decision. But unfortunately Jane came back sooner than Sarutobi thought he would, and the villagers still hated and despised Naruto and believed he was the Kyuubi. When he first tricked Jane into believing that Naruto was dead and then gave him the right to travel wherever he wanted, he thought he was doing the right thing. He even had the support of Danzo, Kaharu and Homura, who had all agreed to have Jane leave the village. Since Sarutobi knew that if Jane stayed in the village and learned that Naruto was alive and had been turned into a Jinchuriki and saw how the villagers and some shinobis treated him, Jane would have lashed out at them and stopped at nothing to protect Naruto. When Sarutobi announced the news that the Kyuubi had been sealed into Naruto, he had believed that the villagers would have respected the Yondaime last request and treated Naruto as a hero. Sadly, that did not happen. The fear, hate, anger and loss that the Kyuubi had created had been too strong, and the people saw Naruto as the Kyuubi himself instead of the boy he was. After seeing this, he knew that he had to have Jane leave the village or else Konoha could have been destroyed. He knew that if Jane stayed, it would be revealed that Naruto was also Minato's son and Jane's brother, hence placing him in danger. Since he was related to the Konoha no Kiroi Senko, Konoha's Yellow Flash, Konoha no Shouten Gosai, Konoha's Red Death, and Konoha no Hitokiri Badosai, Konoha's sword-drawing manslayer, which would earn him countless enemies all around the shinobi world. Not to mention the fact that if Jané stayed and he protected Naruto, it would divide the village, since Jané had enormous influence in Konoha, due to the fact he was the last of the Akechi clan, one of the mightiest shinobi clans that had lived. He was also the son of Namikaze Minato Konoha no Kiroi Senko and the Yondaime Hokage, and the son of Akechi Gracia, also known as Konoha no Quinzu Burrito, Konoha's Queen of Blades. He was the former student of Hyuga Hiyashi, the current clan head of the Hyuga clan, one of Konoha's most prominent and influential clans. He had close ties with the Aburame clan and the Inuzuka clan and was the godson of Kishin Tetsu, one of Konoha's few great sword masters. Jané was also a hero in the Third Great Shinobi World War and in the Kyuubi attack, hence many shinobis and people in Konoha look up to him and held him high regard. Jané also had many friends in the shinobi's ranks, most now being Jonin in Anbuin who would side with him. Hence the village would have been deeply divided between two factions, the ones who hated Naruto for having the Kyuubi in him and the ones who were on Jané's side, and if Konoha's enemies saw the village divided they would have attacked and destroyed Konoha. There was also the chance that Jané would just take Naruto away and leave Konoha, which also could not be allowed. Since the shinobi elders as well as most of the council would never have allowed the Jinchuriki of the most powerful of all the Bijus inside of him leave the village, where they would have had both Jané and Naruto hunted down like animals. Not to mention the fact that if the other shinobi nations learned of that, they may have lured Jané and Naruto to join their village and turn them both against Konoha. Hence Sarutobi believed he had only one choice, which was to trick Jané into believing that Naruto was dead and have him leave the village. Sarutobi had even had to argue with Jiraiya for hours before he got him to agree to his plan, since Jiraiya did not like it and because he did not agree with it, but eventually Sarutobi had got him to agree. After Jané left, Sarutobi had thought Jiraiya would have stayed to help keep an eye on Naruto or even help rise him, but sadly that did not happen, since not long after Jané's departure Jiraiya left the village without so much as a word. When Jané had left, Sarutobi had believed that over time the people of Konoha would forget their hate of Naruto and see that he was just a boy and see that he could one day become a great protector for them. He even believed that if Naruto stayed, he would grow up and bond with the people and come to love the village as much as his father did and be just as loyal to it. But sadly that plan did not work. The people continued to see Naruto as the Kyuubi and was attacked by them. Sarutobi had even forbidden the information of Naruto being the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi in the hopes that Naruto could bond with the younger generation, but that too failed when parents told their children to stay away, saying that he was trouble, leaving Naruto further alone with no friends. But even despite that, Sarutobi believed he had gotten Naruto to still love the village and want to protect it and everyone in and try and prove them wrong about him being a demon. But now with Jané here that could change, since Naruto would then learn that he lied to him about having any family. This would then destroy the trust he had built with Naruto and combine the hardship and suffering that the villagers put him through, Naruto could turn against Konoha. As Sarutobi thought this, he could not help but think about how things could turn so terribly wrong with just one person's return. Soon after, the members of Konoha's council arrived one by one. After everyone was seated in the large double doors of the council room were closed and Sarutobi spoke. Thank you all for coming so quickly for this emergency council meeting. I know you were all busy with your own affairs. What is it that is so important, that you needed to have an emergency council meeting and to send out Anbu to inform us of it? Sarutobi asked Homura. The reason why I called this meeting is that little over 3 hours ago Akechi Jané returned to the village. When Sarutobi said this, excited muttering broke out between the council members, although concerned looks appeared on Homura and Kaharu faces, where they both turned and looked at Sarutobi sharply, who just nodded. When Danzo heard this, he narrowed his one visible eye, since he knew how dangerous Jeanne was, and if he returned it would ruin any chance he had of gaining control of his brother. Not only that, but he knew that Jeanne could very well bring about Konoha's ruin in revenge for the acts of the villagers of Konoha against his brother. This is excellent news. The Yundaim's son has returned to us. Now that he is here, perhaps he might want to take his father's mantle, spoke one of the civilian members named Oroka Akogi, who was a wealthy merchant and had used his influence to make sure that Naruto was kicked out and refused service in most stores and restaurants. And perhaps he will also avenge his father as well. Not to mention all other shinobis and people that died during the Kyuubi attack and kill it, once and for all, spoke another member of the civilian council named Mekora Chijin. Mekora Chijin was from a power noble civilian family who were among the first non-shinobi families to join Konoha when it was founded. His family held a great deal of wealth and influence in Konoha, and had often used his family wealth and influence to organize attacks on Naruto, and have certain shinobis look the other way if they saw anything. At this, Sarutobi could only sigh. Fools, Jeanne would never do either of those things. He would sooner become a genin again than become Hokage, since he doesn't want to take Minato's mantle. Not to mention he would sooner skin himself than hurt Naruto, and if they keep talking like that in front of him, then they are liable to find their heads mounted on his wall. I'm afraid that will not happen, Sink, spoke Sarutobi before he was interrupted by a loud voice of a Chunin shouting. You can't go in there. The Hokage and the council are in the middle of a EMERGACY meeting and your forb, AAARRRRRGGGGGHHHHH, shouted a Chunin before he screamed in pain, which was followed by a sickening sound of bone cracking. Stop. Your UNDERA shouted another Chunin, who quickly screamed in pain as well, and loud crash was heard which sounded like as if a wall was crashing down. The crash was then followed by several more noises of bones breaking, screams of pain, large banging sounds as if something or someone was being smashed against something hard, and loud crashes as if someone or something was sent crashing through another wall. What the hell is going on out there? Cried Akamichi Choza, and as if answering his question, a Chunin was suddenly sent crashing through the large double doors of the council room. The council room doors were completely knocked off their hinges when the Chunin hit it, while Chunin himself was sent flying through the council room, where he then slammed into the wall behind the council table, and made a massive dent in the wall with many spider web cracks around it, after which he then fell onto the floor unconscious and bleeding from the head. When the Hokage and the council turned back to the now open doorway, they saw that the entire hallway that led to the council room was completely destroyed with holes, dents and cracks all along the ceiling, the walls and floor. They also saw the bodies of several dozen or more Chunins that had guarded the council room scattered all along the hallway unconscious. But that sight was not what had many of them shivering in fear slightly. The sight that had many of them shivering in fear slightly was the figure standing in the doorway in front of them, cloaked in black, like an avatar of death, with a dark, menacing and murderous aura surrounding him. That figure was Akechi Jeanne, whose head was lowered slightly and his hair hanging down covering his eyes. Ah shit. Jeanne is pissed. This meeting is going to very troublesome, especially if this meeting is what I think it's about. And if it is, then we're going to be in for one hell of a shitstorm very soon, thought Nara Shikaku, since he knew the word troublesome did not even come close to describing what he knew was going to happen next. After the council turned to look at Jeanne raised his head up so that the Sandaime and the council could see his cold, merciless and murderous eyes now. They also now saw that his pupils had shrunk and his iris had grown 10. When the Sandaime, the shinobi elders, the Anbu commander and the clan heads saw this, they began to get scared, since they immediately recognized the way his eyes were, since this was the only physical characteristic of a user of the Basakamui Berserker Fury limit when they have it activated. When the civilian members looked into his eyes, they, along with some of the clan heads, could not help but shudder slightly and feel imitated out of the sheer intensity of Jeanne's cold, merciless, murderous eyes. Those eyes, those are the eyes of a true shinobi, a true slayer of men, remarked Danzo in his mind as he looked into Jeanne's eyes, since although he hated Jeanne and believed him a danger to both himself and Konoha, he did respect Jeanne's skill and power, which said a lot, since there were few people that Danzo ever respected in any way. For a minute or so everyone remained quiet in the council room. The Hokage and the council member just continued to look at Jeanne in silence. This remained so, until Jeanne suddenly spoke up in a cold, calm yet hate-filled tone of voice. Sarutobi, we need to talk.